Mrs. Lemons and Mr. Tomatoes were neighbors who lived in a small town. They had known each other for years and always had a friendly, flirtatious relationship. Mrs. Lemons was known for her delicious lemonade, and Mr. Tomatoes grew the best tomatoes in the area. They often traded produce, and Mr. Tomatoes always made sure to compliment Mrs. Lemons on her cooking skills. One hot summer day, Mrs. Lemons invited Mr. Tomatoes over for some of her famous lemonade. He eagerly accepted, looking forward to spending some time with her. As he sipped the cold drink, they chatted about their gardens and shared gardening tips. They talked about their families and reminisced about old times. As the sun began to set, Mr. Tomatoes realized how much he enjoyed spending time with Mrs. Lemons. He decided to take a chance and ask her out on a date. To his delight, Mrs. Lemons agreed, and they made plans for a dinner date at a local restaurant. On the night of their date, Mr. Tomatoes arrived at Mrs. Lemons' house with a bouquet of her favorite flowers. She was thrilled and blushed at the sight of them. They had a lovely evening, enjoying each other's company and sharing stories about their lives. After dinner, as they walked back to Mrs. Lemons' house, Mr. Tomatoes took her hand in his. They stopped under a streetlight, and he looked deeply into her eyes. "Mrs. Lemons," he said, "I have to tell you something. I've had feelings for you for a long time, and I can't imagine not having you in my life. Would you be interested in exploring a romantic relationship with me?" Mrs. Lemons felt her heart skip a beat. She had always felt a spark between them, but she was surprised and thrilled by Mr. Tomatoes' boldness. She smiled and squeezed his hand. "I'd like that very much," she said. And so began a beautiful relationship between Mrs. Lemons and Mr. Tomatoes. They continued to trade produce, share gardening tips, and enjoy each other's company. But now there was something more between them, a deep and meaningful connection that brought them both joy and happiness.